homeowner in the Bronx started renting a basement apartment to a woman who was from Ecuador. These migrants were gang members who had been arrested over and over.
So gangs are now taking over homes and apartments in New York City. In some cases, they disguise themselves as normal renters, but in other instances, they simply break in and destroy the place. And unfortunately, New York is not the only city in America where this is happening.
Some new video today shows that some are calling gang violence at an apartment complex in Aurora. We see men there entering an apartment building with several weapons, then busting down a door.
A sergeant and two cops pull up to this house. They see a man pointing a gun down a driveway. They chase that man into a basement apartment and they make the arrest. And he's an asylum seeker. He's a migrant.
They used this woman to get them in there, and once one of them was in there, it became like a clubhouse for 8 or 9 of the most dangerous people the landlord had ever been introduced to.
You can see the windows are shattered out. There are things on the roof damaged. Fire officials on the scene tell us the spark was an extension cord that was charging multiple e-bikes. Now, they say this is a property, again, that home right in the middle, that is a problem for the community. They say they have seen people coming and going, and they say it was only a matter of time before this property caused a problem.
And right now, even as we speak, a new migrant caravan is on its way to the U.S.-Mexico border. Those in the caravan say they want to cross into the U.S. before November's election.
They weren't afraid of being arrested. They weren't afraid of anything. They knew nobody was going to do anything, so they just came back and set up shop like everything was everything.
So 2 homes were just totally destroyed after a gang took one over and accidentally burned it down. But nobody's talking about how this problem of gangsters taking over apartments and using them as hideouts tends to happen more in sanctuary cities than anywhere else. And it's been happening here in New York for months, fueled by the proliferation of dangerous gang members through our shelter system, who act as if they're entering an American sanctuary city as someone who's fleeing poverty or persecution, when the only thing on their mind is persecuting the law-abiding. And the reason this is happening in New York and Chicago and Denver and other cities like this is because these gang members understand, according to critics, that they can get away with a lot more in parts of the country where laws are designed to protect them. For example, in New York, it's against the law for police to share the immigration status of someone they arrest with the federal government. And part of the reason gang members operate with such brazenness here is because even if the NYPD arrests them and federal immigration finds out, our police are not allowed to hold that individual until the government can come get them, which means immigration enforcement has to make their own arrest on their own time with zero help from our city. And that brings us to the real reason why we're now witnessing gang activity in this country that we've never seen before. These criminals, once they get here, not only are they protected, they can also take advantage of a very generous social safety net set up for those fleeing extreme poverty. And they take advantage of this generosity to connect not with a path leading to the American dream, which is what most asylum seekers do, but with the criminal underworld. Now, New York in particular finds itself between a rock and a hard place because while our mayor and police realize the dangers we're now facing because of this gang activity, they're fighting an uphill battle against a legal system that keeps criminals out on the street when they commit minor, non-violent offenses, like engaging in a calm, peaceful shoplifting spree that doesn't hurt anything except the bottom line of a big company, or shut down one of New York's many small, struggling businesses. But critics say we've got another problem because this city and its shelter system are now full of individuals who may not be who they say they are, and may be hiding from a past life as a criminal, or worse, trying to start a new life of crime here in America, which recently happened when gang members took over a building and started a fire that led to 3 law-abiding families losing their homes forever. So, fires in New York City, that's nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, these guys put out about 24,000 of them every single year. But recently, the FDNY encountered a fire that was different from the norm, not because of what caused it, but because of who started it and how they did it.
You can take a look at those 2 split homes right behind me there. You can see the windows are shattered out. There are things on the roof damaged. That is where the fire originated, and it all has to do with what was on the backyard of that property that we're going to give our viewers.
So before we see the backyard of this place, it's important to understand who was inside this building illegally that started the fire to begin with. And the home in question is located in Marine Park, a very nice residential neighborhood, and it had been abandoned for a very long time, long enough that junkies were able to get inside and had been squatting there. But according to the New York Post, those junkies rented out the home or part of the home to asylum seekers who then moved in and were living there as well. Neighbors interviewed said problems had been happening at the home for a while and an unknown number of people were living inside of it. They claim there were fights started between between people living at the property and neighbors nearby. And what you have here is a critical mass of people living inside one particular property, doing things inside of it that are not exactly legal or safe, which is why it burned down.
What was back there was a hoarding of trash that basically acted as an accelerant and kindling for the fire. Now, fire officials on the scene tell us the spark was an extension cord that was charging multiple e-bikes. Now, when that extension cord caught fire, so did the lithium-ion batteries. The flames...
So the backyard of this home, which was valued at $750,000, it was full of stolen e-bikes and trash. Now, from the street, you can see a lot of the debris that caught on fire in the back that had kind of been hauled out onto this little side area here. But there are some photos of the backyard online. Look at this. It was basically a big dump right there, ready to catch fire. What a disaster. But what's really sad about this story is that the people in this property that were living there, destroying it, their behavior destroyed both properties on either side of it as well. If you look at the front door of the house to the left, you'll see paperwork from the city that stops people from coming inside as the property was damaged pretty badly. The side of the house is burned and scorched. It's likely totaled, which is a shame. You can tell people were living inside of it because the exterior is well maintained. It looks like the porch has recently updated windows. It looks nice. There's landscaping work out front, but now the roof area has no windows and there's a burned up mattress on top of the building. And whoever was living there spending money on that property, improving it, now does not have access to it and can't live there. All because our city has a system in place that allows gang members to take over properties and do whatever they want inside of them. But sadly, this story gets even worse.
This is a property, again, that home right in the middle where you can see the burns on the side, that is a problem for the community. And they say it was only a matter of time before this property caused a problem. That's what they say they were worried about, that they were reporting to every agency they could. And unfortunately, those calls, despite that, this incident still happening here today.
So the fire at this property was so intense, it not only took out the property that was on the left side, but the property on the right side that was attached via a wall, that one was also condemned as well. And there was a family living there that had 3 small kids. And now this family, who'd apparently purchased the home back in 2021, now they've got nowhere to go. And this has people asking, at what point does creating a city that is a sanctuary for criminals with laws that don't punish them something that starts impacting the law abiding? Now, since these neighbors shared an adjacent wall with this property that was turned into a house of horrors, when they were interviewed, they claimed that people were just coming and going from that place at all hours of the night. They suspect that many of the folks entering and leaving were people buying things that were illegal. Plus, they claim that there was always fighting going on here in the way of verbal arguments and shouting matches at all hours of the day. And apparently this year, 18 complaints were filed with 311 for public disturbances. But it gets even worse because before the fire started that took out these 3 properties, police had been called to this place 15 times over the course of 2 weeks. That's twice a day. And nothing was done to remove these bad actors from a property they did not own. Plus, it reveals that this entire area was being terrorized by whatever was happening inside, yet nothing was being done about it. There were no laws to get these people out, and the only way they ended up leaving was when the place caught fire because of the dangerous conditions inside of it. But sadly, the tragic tale that we have at this property isn't the only one that's taken place in New York recently. And many observers say that the rising gang violence that started here first should have been a warning to the rest of the country as to what was coming. 2 cities and towns that have laws that seem deliberately designed to protect bad actors and help them live lives of crime. Look at this. All over this city, we got people sneaking into buildings who shouldn't be inside. And security images like the ones on the side of that building, those are like the same types of images that we're now seeing out of Colorado, where a dangerous Venezuelan gang took over an entire apartment complex, which is also something that's been happening here in New York for months.
A homeowner in the Bronx started renting a basement apartment to a woman who was from Ecuador. But then within a matter of 2 weeks, the woman told the landlord, listen, I'm going back. I'm leaving. It became like a clubhouse for 8 or 9 of the most dangerous people the landlord had ever been introduced to.
So these guys were really sneaky, and as you're about to see, this was a violent gang intent on getting their hands on a property that they could use as a home base for illegal activity. And they aren't the only gang in town doing this, either taking over apartments by stealth or by force. Earlier this year, a moped gang was shut down after their apartment was raided, and they were committing snatch and grab robberies all over town, stealing phones and wallets. And apparently the apartment they were in wasn't just a hideout, it was illegally modified to house way more people than it was supposed to. And in New York, the way that these criminals get inside of apartments and take them over, it's not like the security footage here, which was probably a breaking and entering or some other crime. No, that's not how they've been doing it here. They do something much sneakier. They get somebody who's non-threatening, maybe a woman who then rents the apartment herself and invites everybody else over after as roommates or family members, effectively sneaking them in. And when you learn about the people that this woman snuck into this home that was taken over, you'll realize why she couldn't tell the landlord who they were. Or at least who they really were.
These migrants were gang members who had been arrested over and over and over again. In fact, 4 of them were detained in Texas. They were set for deportation and they were re-released into America.
So these guys, they were essentially fugitives. They were in custody, but then I guess accidentally released because of overcrowding at a facility in Texas, and then they made their way to New York. A sanctuary city which, like many in America, won't turn anyone over to federal immigration authorities after making an arrest. That protection essentially allowed these criminals to live normal lives while committing crime, and apparently they were selling weapons and other contraband out of the apartment they had taken over, knowing that if the apartment they were living in was ever raided, they wouldn't face justice different from anybody who was officially here with permanent residence in the United States. But their lack of fear of local law enforcement went much further than that, because apparently they were using this apartment not only as a place to commit crime, but they had also stopped paying rent to their landlord, so they were living there for free, which is what caused him to get the authorities involved. They probably could have stayed had they paid their rent, and the landlord probably would have kept his mouth shut because he was getting paid, revealing just how easy it is for criminals to come here and set up shop. Yet just like our house fire in Brooklyn that evicted neighbors with families who'd done nothing wrong, these guys were so out of control that they were terrorizing the entire community in which they lived. And it took an event almost as tragic as a fire destroying people's homes and making them homeless to start the cycle that would eventually lead to these gangsters getting removed from the property they'd stolen.
Police were called because someone was out in the street threatening another person. Cops came. The individual ran back into the house and they followed him and they cleared out the house. They took 8 people out of that basement apartment, all of whom were arraigned, and pretty much all of them were released because of bail reform. None of them were.
So this house of horrors finally started to get noticed by law enforcement when the crime going on inside of it spilled out into the street. And you'd think that this is the part of the story where this nightmare would officially be over, but if that were the case, living in a sanctuary city which has laws that protect criminals wouldn't be such a big deal. Because it takes both. Remember, these guys were wanted by federal immigration authorities, and although they were arrested for running around in the street with weapons, they were all released after that transpired. And federal authorities, they had to go back to this house on their own time to arrest these people and get them out of there a few days later. Had the criminals not gone back to the property, they'd probably still be out there. But the most ridiculous part of all this is you see signs all over New York telling you that weapons are illegal, and you can't even bring them into certain parts of town like Times Square. If someone's caught with an illegal weapon, they're supposed to be held in prison for 3.5 years at a minimum. Yet these people had weapons, were selling weapons, and they weren't even put in jail because of it. That's crazy. And critics say this should have been a wake-up call for other cities like New York and other parts of the country.
These squatters were so relentless that they just came back the next day. They weren't afraid of being arrested. They weren't afraid of anything. They knew nobody was going to do anything, so they just came back and set up shop like everything was everything.
So with all of this going on in New York City for months, you've got to wonder what folks in other parts of the country were thinking when they read about this stuff. Did they really think that the same people intent on committing the same types of crimes and growing their criminal gang operations wouldn't try to do the same thing in a place like Colorado? Because it looks like that's exactly what's happening right now, with one gang taking over an entire apartment complex and evicting the residents who live there. And things there are following a similar pattern as they do in New York, where the crime that we allow spills out into the suburbs and surrounding parts of the East Coast. And tell me if this sounds familiar. You've got people getting arrested in Denver who were wanted in other parts of the country for committing other crimes, yet fled there because they knew they'd be protected. Now look, sanctuary cities, they aren't the only cities in America not immune to the presence of gang members who've snuck into America under the guise of seeking asylum. But the reason things are so much worse in a sanctuary city like New York, for example, is because of our other progressive laws that protect criminals when they do things that are wrong. And what's crazy to think about is that the amount of criminal activity taking place in New York would look very different if we actually enforced the laws that we have on the books. And the problem of criminals coming here to evade federal immigration authorities wouldn't be magnified by the fact that once they're here, they essentially benefit from protection from any legal authority whatsoever, because that's what our laws here do. But when you look at these folks who've lost their homes in a fire that was started by people that never should have been there in the first place, you've got to ask yourself, where is their sanctuary city? Where will they find refuge from this crime and persecution that has been inflicted upon them? And you know who else this affects? This affects the law-abiding asylum seekers, who are the vast majority of people that have come here. They didn't come here to join gangs and go on shoplifting sprees at department stores or places like CVS. No, they didn't come here to do that, and now they're suffering because of all this crime, which was what destroyed their home countries. Think about that. You come all the way to America because you think you're starting a better life, and then you've got the same people here that destroyed the place where you were from, destroying this place. Is that what's happening? Do you think New York's policies, as far as not enforcing the laws we have made all of these problems much, much worse? Let me know. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.